Hi everyone, I'm Hannah from EO team. Welcome to EO Builders webinar. So EO has been doing a lot of these webinars recently where we feature different founders who have been featured on EO to come in and host in-depth live sessions with us. And to give you a little bit of a background on what EO channel has been doing recently, EO stands for Entrepreneurship and Opportunities. And for over a year and a half, we've been featuring founders and investors worldwide to provide their insights and their network to the global audience through the EO channel. So our mission is to really empower different individuals to be better equipped with the right resources in order to grow as an entrepreneur wherever you are. And there's something recently that we've started, which is part of the EO Builders Club and the Builders webinars that we've been running. So recently we launched the EO Builders Club, and we're very excited to be bringing this to you. So you can actually scan the QR code later on and enter the space as well. And we have different tiers in how we're managing it. But essentially, this is a community for startup founders and potential startup founders who want to build something for the future. So here we host webinars just like this, but this one today is being live streamed to a bigger audience. But also we have private webinars that happen almost on a weekly basis that really bring in the founders to have a very in-depth conversation about how they view the world, how they are changing the world. So here, on top of the webinars, we also have different education programs and online networking sessions to connect more founders. And the idea is that we really, we believe that people who resonate with our story are also going to be resonating with each other. So that's sort of the idea behind it. And today we have a very special guest joining us real time, and it is Matt Martin. Yes. So Matt Martin is the CEO of Clockwise. And to give you a bit of an explanation about the great product, he has actually been featured on our channel 2 times recently. And Clockwise is an AI scheduling and calendar tool used by companies such as Uber, Zoom, Atlassian, and OpenAI. And it recently raised a $45 million Series C funding in 2022, bringing the company's total amount of funding raised to $80 million. So you can tell that he's been in this journey for quite some time and has been really honing the art and skill of finding a product that truly thrives in the market. So today we will be hearing from Matt on how he views this highly competitive landscape of calendar/scheduling productivity market, and how he has approached the idea of finding product market fit for Clockwise, or should we say maintaining or constantly finding. So we're very excited to be bringing him today. So let's invite him to the stage without further ado. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Anna. Thanks for having me. It's really fun to be here live.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. So, can you just for the very beginning, can you give a brief introduction about your product, Clockwise, and what kind of problem you're solving at the moment?
Absolutely. So Clockwise is a calendar assistant for you, your team, and your company to help you get the best schedule possible. So it's constantly watching your schedule on your behalf, helping to fix conflicts, helping to open up more time for focus, helping to open up deep work blocks, and generally to help you get a better schedule that helps you do the most impactful and productive work inside your organization. And we work today with some amazing companies like Netflix, Pinterest, Atlassian, Uber, Chime. The list goes on. Largely other software and technology companies, but really anybody who does office work benefits from Clockwise. And we do have a diverse set of users that are in places like large corporations or media organizations or even life sciences.
Right, awesome. And a little bit more about this problem that you're solving. How did you initially discover this problem as something that you was worth solving as a business idea?
Yeah, I mean, so I was at a company called Related Q, and I was a front-end engineer and an engineering manager. And that company was acquired by Salesforce. And it was a great acquisition, great company, great product. And I was at Salesforce after the acquisition, managing my software team, and just seeing how difficult it was for me to get time to be proactive about work. It felt like I was constantly in a reactive mode. I was jumping from meeting to meeting. I was jumping from problem to problem. I was helping out in a one-on-one, but I didn't have a lot of time to sit down and actually make forward progress on larger projects. And I was also observing that on my team. So among software engineers, colleagues on design, on marketing, people were having a difficult time getting time in their workday for really important work. And in that environment, I was just seeing like there's a really deep issue here. Because these are really intelligent, really motivated people. They want to deliver great work. They want to be able to sit down and help deliver great, high impactful product for the company, but their schedules are kind of conspiring against them and getting in the way. And that's where I started to see the problem. And it initially, it's funny, like time is kind of this amorphous thing, like we all obviously deal with it day in, day out, but it just is part of our existence. It's, literally the fourth dimension. So it is there. It's really easy to just become inured to the complications around it and just to kind of give up, just go like, well, that's the way it is. And to a large degree, that's how I felt. It's like, okay, this is all messed up, but like, what am I going to do about it? I'm just going to keep doing my job. But what I think led to the founding of Clockwise is uh, one key insight, which is that really, if you started to pull apart people's schedules, the issue wasn't necessarily that there wasn't any time. The issue was that the time wasn't being spent in the right ways. And if you looked at how it was structured, it was just a coordination problem. People would go schedule a meeting at the time they could find, which happened to be a really bad time for the four people they were scheduling with. Or, somebody would send a Slack message right in the middle of when somebody's trying to go heads down working, distracting them. And so all that work could probably be done effectively if there was just something that was helping to coordinate and helping to coordinate across all the teammates. And so that small lens, that initial nugget of like, okay, there's probably a coordination problem here, that started to make it feel more tractable as something that could be helped or assisted with software. Because, one thing that software is quite good at is crunching a lot of information, taking a lot of data points, analyzing it, and figuring out how to optimize against it. And that's initially exactly what we did with Clockwise, is help to optimize calendars automatically using the information from the calendar itself.
I think I really resonate with the problem too, because time you feel is the only fair thing in this world. Like you can be equipped with very different things, but the only thing that is the same for everyone is time. And therefore, I think it really comes down to who spends it the best. And in that sense, I really see how you identified a problem within this space that everyone is just really trying to solve, but just can't get around. So that's a very interesting point to how it all started. And I
It
guess,
kind of
yeah.
flips, it kind of flips a perspective in your brain.
Mhm.
You know, for anybody who's listening, you don't look, use Clockwise. I would love you to use Clockwise. It's great. But you don't even need to use Clockwise to start to see this pattern where I think we're all trained to think of time as a very personal asset. You know, it's my time. It's my time. It's how I live my life. It's what I do during the day. You know, my calendar is my calendar. But this little perspective shift of seeing it as a shared resource, realizing that, yeah, we do all have the same time and we're constantly making requests of each other on how to use it. You just start to see it a little bit differently where you go, oh, actually, the reason I'm in this meeting is not because it's my time, it's because my colleague asked me to be here. And you know, maybe I just should ask if there's a better time. Maybe I should push back on that. Maybe we should find a better time for everyone. Do I really need to be in this meeting? Is this really the best use of my time? Like it's a coordination issue, and time itself is something that we're all clamoring to use and we're asking of each other.
Awesome, great. And about Clockwise, a bit more specifically on the product, because we have a lot of product builders who are keen to learn about the behind the scenes of building this product today in the
Yeah.
audience. So my next question would be, how did you prioritize while you were building Clockwise, which features to focus on and which features to not? When there are all these different problems that you see, how were you able to decide that these are the ones that we're going to build the features for first?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know that there's one right solution. We still struggle with it today. Because there's always, I think it's a pretty universal experience for people who found a software company and are building a product. There's always more feature requests and more things to build than you have time to do. And so often what can separate out really excellent execution from mediocre execution is focus and making sure that you're spending time in the areas that really matter in terms of moving the business forward. And so that's where I start. It's kind of a less sexy perspective than just feature prioritization. It's really about prioritizing what's going to yield the most impact for your business as you try to validate and progress it. And that changes with stage. So like take you back all the way to the early founding days of Clockwise when it was just me and my two co-founders around my kitchen table. The biggest question we had was, can this even work? Like, we want to optimize calendars automatically with an algorithmic approach. Is that even plausible? Like, is that even something that can be done in the real world on real calendar systems? And so that's what we prioritize doing first. And I think that as you look at the early days or even into later stages of a company, what you're making from a business strategy decision standpoint is what's the biggest uh, risk that I need to de-risk in order to get to the next milestone for the business. So in those very early days, one of the biggest milestones was getting it live in customers' hands. And so you take a step back. What do I need to de-risk in order to actually get it in customers' hands? Well, I need to figure out if this actually works at all. Okay, what do I need to do that? I need to go get live calendar data. I need to, find a friend who's willing to OAuth in their real calendar data. And then we need to run a bunch of experiments on it in memory to see if we can actually get this thing to run. Okay, it runs. All right, now, what's the blocker to somebody trusting that and using it? And then you get in a product prioritization decisions. That shifts later when you have the abundance of real users. And I think the early days is really a sprint to try to get to real users and a volume of real users as fast as you can. Because when you start to get a volume of real users, now you can prioritize against real world usage, what's actually working for people and what's not. But in those early days, you're just trying to advance the business through your own the barriers that exist to getting it out in the market.
Awesome. And uh, regarding how you develop the product, actually, then I guess many people will also wonder, because productivity market is such a competitive market and there are many players who want to be able to solve similar problems. Do you think that you took a different approach than other competitors in terms of making you more stand out and innovative among the other ones?
Yeah. There are a couple things. First, it is not a dodge, but everybody's journey is a little bit different here, and it really depends on your market. You got to stay highly attuned to your customers and the customers that you're targeting. And so for us, as a productivity platform, we're targeting office workers, and it's a pretty diverse set. Like it can be almost any office worker, but if you're building out, I don't know, a assembly line manufacturing software system, it's going to be a much different customer, and you're going to go out and validate it and prioritize against that much, much differently. And so you have to really stay attuned to that. Now, for us in the productivity space, because to your point, it's a pretty popular space, and it's pretty densely populated with tools. I think it really benefited us to have an opinion at the start, um, to have a little bit of an edge to what we were providing, so that we could entice and find those early adopters that were passionate about it. Because Clockwise is a general purpose product, but if you try to push out a general purpose product that appeals to everyone, you're going to stretch yourself too thin. You're not going to find that initial niche that really advocates for you. And you need that. You really need that in the early days. And so for us, our strong perspective is that everybody needs deep work. Everybody needs time for deep work. And deep work is meaningfully different and substantively different than just little blocks of 30 minutes or 15 minutes on your calendar. And Cal Newport, professor at Georgetown, wrote a whole book about this. And so we kind of piggyback on some of that messaging to find those people who that really resonates with. And it turned out to be a lot of software engineers. And so we found that initial core audience in order to break through the noise a little bit. And then you can start to tailor your outreach and your conversation and your materials towards that initial audience. Now, this is a whole different topic, and I'm happy to talk about it, but I won't launch into it right now, which is it does become tricky then when you're transitioning from that initial early adopter audience to a broader audience.
Yes, I definitely want to get to that later in the topic, because there's a whole section that we have for transitioning from B2C to B2B, and also continuously finding the product market fit. But before that, yes, one more question, because you did mention user base and really understanding what the users are. And in the video, you actually mentioned the importance of staying connected to who buys your software. So can you give us a bit of a what do you do at Clockwise in order to gather feedback from users and incorporate it into product development? What's sort of the cycle that you have at the moment?
Yep. So I'll talk a little bit more about the early days, because it does change a little bit as you grow, even though some of these same cycles exist. Um, One of the tricky parts about Clockwise is that the promise of the product is to automatically give you more time in your schedule. And so one of the things that allows us to break through that noise is not just have an opinion about what the product provides to you, but also that, hey, for very low investment, you can get pretty high ROI in the background automatically. And that's kind of a promise that's almost a no-brainer for most people. It's like, a little bit scary to connect your calendar, a little bit scary to have meetings move automatically, but assuming that it does it well, you can set it, kind of forget it, just let it run, and you'll continuously get value out of it. Now, I mention that because that means customers kind of don't want to talk to you. Because like the whole promise of the product is we're not going to bug you, and that it's automatic and it's easy to set up. And so for very, very complicated products, and for products that are high implementation cost, you have an excuse to talk to your user or customer, because you can help them out. You can help them get the most out of it. You can help them power through it. For us, most people just wanted to use it, set it, forget it. And so while certainly there were a lot of patterns where I would email people, like I would email them to reach out if I saw a new logo come in that I thought was interesting. I want to form a relationship. I would want to talk to them. I would try to loop them in with just mostly, like, especially early adopters love to talk about product. They'll love it to be like feel like they have an inside track to what you're building and they have an influence. So I'd usually use that as an excuse. And by the way, that still works today. It's easier to get somebody on the phone to give me input about the product than it is to get them on the phone to give me input about how they feel about the product, if that makes sense. Um, but the point being is that we had to look at a lot of automated methods. So we use a variety of tools to actually watch sessions, to look at a lot of the quantitative data to see how things were trending, and to really be able to troubleshoot what users were doing and feel in their shoes. And then last point on this subject is there's kind of no, if you're doing product development, if you're really focused on the product side, not necessarily the complete business picture, there's just kind of like no replacement for doing monitored user sessions. So we don't do as many of these anymore, but in the early days when we had lower volume users, we would ask them to come to our office, or we'd come to them and we just sit down and watch them use the product. And it's just like wildly rich with information.
Awesome, great. And moving on to the topic of product market fit then, because we have a lot of questions coming in regarding that as well. Let's first talk about the early stages of Clockwise. What were some initial signs or indicators that suggested that Clockwise in its very initial form was resonating with the target market at that time?
Yeah. So product market fit is tricky. It's ill-defined, even though everybody thinks they have a definition. And people have different proposals on how to measure it and how to validate it. I would say you can Google it. You'll probably find Rahul's blog post from Superhuman on measuring product market fit. Like it's pretty good. Um, I don't think it's perfect, but like just pick one. Pick like a metric that you're really oriented on, and pick a metric that you think is a leading indicator for your business. Like if this is going correctly, then other things probably will follow, and orient towards that, and maybe stop asking the question about product market fit for a second, because I think it's really amorphous and it can be a kind of a black hole distraction for people. And what do I mean by that? I mean, in the early days, we wasted a lot of thought cycles on do we have product market fit or not. But looking back with clarity retrospectively, uh, we had a few key metrics that we were oriented on that were way more impactful to guiding us on our journey and getting us to product market fit than this kind of weird question about do we have it. And in the really early days, that was, are people inviting other people? Like, if we get one user in, are they pulling other people in inside their same organization, which we just looked at the domain. So, like, we have a user at Lyft.com. Are other users from Lyft.com joining now or not? Um, that's a sign of something for sure. And it's a leading indicator of something that's really important to our business, which is that if we can have more network adoption, viral adoption, that will get user counts up, will grow, we'll be able to sell into the businesses. But I wouldn't say it's indicative of product market fit. It just means the user base is growing. The second one that was a little bit later on is, are people adopting this is a very specific to Clockwise, but we have a critical feature that unlocks a lot of the power of Clockwise, which is called flexible meetings. It's not the only feature. We have a lot of them, but flexible meetings allows you to take a meeting, indicate that it can move a little bit within parameters, and that it allows us to move that automatically to give you productivity. So you can just think about it as like, if you're building a product, what's your most critical feature that's a leading indicator that that user is going to be a successful user of your product? It's like, if they use this, the odds of them being a long-term successful user go way up. And we would measure that in initial onboarding. How hard can we drive that? Not over 30 days, not over 15 days, not over 7 days. First onboarding, how high can we push that? And how fast can we push it? And then collectively over it, we're looking at the rate of adoption inside of the overall user base. Like, how fast is our user growth accelerating? And then the final layer, which I think you do need to actually know whether you have whatever product market fit means, didn't come till a lot later. I talk about it in the video. We probably monetized too late. But I do think you need that final check of, okay, for a productivity software that's product-led, and product-led growth is different for every product. But for a productivity PLG company, we have user growth, we have adoption of key features, we have engagement, we have retention. Are they going to pay for the thing? And are they going to keep paying for the thing?
Awesome, awesome. And we have a question from the audience related to that, which is I think it's from Konuk, and he's asking, are there any good methods or questions to validate a startup's product market fit in its early stages? And I think you already kind of mentioned that which metrics that you were using. I guess a little more in detail then, when you decided that how much people are recommending the product to other people, why was that the initial go-to for Clockwise at the time? What was sort of the reasoning behind these metrics that you focused on?
Yeah, again, all of this is going to be a little bit different for your specific startup. And so I'll tell my story in a way that hopefully allows people to analogize to their own.
Perfect.
And so the specific metric and how we're measuring is less important than the logic behind it. And the logic behind it is we knew we have a piece of productivity software. That much is clear. We know that we have a piece of productivity software where the fundamental thesis is that the more people that adopt it, the more value we can provide to the organization, because it's something where we need access to more and more of the calendar. I think those are pretty unassailable. The last part that was also our contention that is maybe a little bit more debatable is we felt that top-down tool like ours wouldn't work because individual users have to trust the product because we're connecting to your calendar, to your it's inside the organization, it's the organization's calendar, but it's your calendar. And so if we just ask an engineering leader to come in, push it top down, people would probably viscerally reject that. And so we had a few fundamental beliefs about how this product would work in the market that led us to believe that we had to acquire a lot of users inside of an organization and we had to do it user by user. And so that's what leads to us believing that that initial sharing was so important because we had to build it in a way that will allow it to spread organically because we're not going to be able to go out and hand-to-hand combat our way to adopting every user because we're not going to do a top-down implementation, at least to start. So that's what you're kind of looking for is you're looking for, again, it goes back to a little bit of de-risking what you're trying to build. And this all shifts, by the way, and it's something that people don't talk about a lot. I mean, there's kind of like hustle culture around startups and all sorts of blend together, but it's very different if you are a solo entrepreneur who's trying to bootstrap a company to be revenue positive and profitable for you. Like you look at something like Basecamp, that has earned a lot of money for the founders and been very successful. And they're really not a venture capital backed startup. And so the mileposts are slightly different for them. And they'd probably argue are uh, more natural and less contorted. For a venture backed company, a big milestone is being able to get the next round of funding. And so you have to look at what do we need to do in order to sustain and power the business forward. And so for us as a VC-backed company, a lot of what we're looking to de-risk is traction. Can the core fundamentals of the business work? If you're bootstrapping your business and you need to get to profitability, it may be much better to look at early revenue than it is at early scale.
Awesome. And I think people are curious about your product as well. So before we dive into a little bit more about that monetization part, Arnav here is asking, is there a B2C version of Clockwise? And I think it's because we shifted more towards B2B now that he's asking this question. So can you actually tell us about this transition where you were targeting a certain set of users and then how you were able to also expand to the B2B side?
Yeah, it's weird. So the I'm gonna take a step back here because I have a lot of opinions. There for the last probably 5 years or so, there's a lot of buzz and excitement around product-led growth companies. And so kind of canonical examples here are companies like Slack, Dropbox, Atlassian before that. But today, and they used to be rare, but today you can count a lot of them. Notion, Figma, uh, Slack certainly. Like there are tons, and they tend to be productivity pieces of software. The advantage of that model is that you can go out and acquire users at scale, and you can use additional users to acquire more users. The seedy underbelly that nobody tells you about is that it's way easier just to go sell the dang thing. Like with product-led growth, what you're doing is creating a product that's good enough to pull people in the front door, convert them to users, and then ultimately convert them to paying users, and then scale that into the business. Like uh, Figma makes a lot of money off of Uber's licenses because they have a huge amount of scale. They don't make, I mean, they do make a lot collectively, but not nearly as much from individual users. And so all these PLG companies, and I'm starting here because I do actually have a point eventually. All these PLG companies are fundamentally B2B companies. It's just it starts it starts in a way that looks like it's B2C because if you're Figma or if you're Slack, anybody can go to your website and sign up. But really, the fundamental engine of their revenue comes from larger organizations buying a lot of licenses. And it's why it's kind of a weird model because it creates some tensions. You have to go out and make sure you're creating a great product that acquires users at volume, but then you have to be really mindful of how that scales inside the organizations so that you can sell ultimately to a departmental or company-wide buyer. And finally, getting back to the question, we have never had a purely B2C version of Clockwise in that everybody who signs up actually has to use a calendar address that is associated with a business account. So if you try to go sign up for Clockwise with hannah@gmail.com, it actually doesn't work. We will reject you at the stop. And we probably need to enable that at some point for scale purposes, but we haven't done it to date because it's not a terrible filter. It hurts our virality, but we really don't, from a revenue perspective, ever make much off of single seat users. So by only taking in users that have some capacity to scale into the larger organization, it helps to filter at the top users that actually can be customers.
Awesome, great. And finally, on to the this part of the question in the growth strategy. In terms of growth strategy, there was in the video you mentioned that you decided that your definition of product market fit is that it's not something that's static, and that's something that a lot of people mistake. Based on that experience of of acquiring these B2B of users,
Yeah.
how were you able to come to that conclusion?
Well, the whole conversation around product market fit is so fascinating, and there are probably smarter people who do have a really good definition who are listening to this and are like, Matt, you're an idiot. Like, there's a real definition, I'll give it to you. But I start from the premise that it's kind of ambiguous because I can think of several moments in the journey of Clockwise where I'm like, we got it, we got product market fit, and then you go get it again, and I'll give you a couple. When we first saw users inside an organization going like this, like where it was scaling up with that nice hockey stick curve and it's scaling up, we're like, holy crap, we've got it. Like there's something here and it's working. And then we're like, well, we got to get a lot more of them. And when we started to see it spread across other companies, we're like, ooh, we've really got something. And then we had, but none of them were paying. And so we had to put in a monetization model that worked for everybody and actually has to charge them. And let me tell you, Hannah, like we were scared. Like I would, like it's like you envision this moment as an early founder where you get product market fit and you're like, my world's going to be better, everything's going to be easier. But we had gotten through that first one, and then we're going to go ask to get people to pay, and we're like, is this going to work? Like, is anybody going to pay? Is this going to scale? Like, do we really have product market fit? We've never asked anybody to pay us. And then that started working, and we were like, oh my God, we are off to the races. Like, this is like, we're just going to print money and like live on yachts. But then it's the natural progress. Like, you get to that next hurdle. It's like, okay, we got people to pay. How do we start to scale this out into larger enterprises? Like, how do we actually punch up to those larger buyers? And then, something like, uh, zero rate interest rates stop being reality, budgets tighten, the software ecosystem goes through what I think is fair to qualify as a mild recession, lots of layoffs, tighter budgets, and you have to relearn product market fit. Like all of a sudden, that benchmark by which people are saying, yes, Clockwise is valuable enough for us to pay pretty good money on a sustained basis, that got moved up because all those businesses have tighter budgets and are more strict about what they're spending money on. And so yeah, I think that the process of finding product market fit is both a factor of staying very in touch with what your customers' expectations and demands are. And those expectations demands can shift because of outside forces like a correction in the market. They can shift because a competitor makes a product that's competitive to yours. They can shift because an incumbent decides to enter your space. They can shift for a variety of reasons. So you're constantly watching for where you need to be in order to have fit with the market you're addressing. And then it expands over time too, because your business is going to expand. So you're going to address new types of users, new types of audience. And hopefully you're not starting from scratch. You know, you have that initial core thesis that's working and you're trying to expand it, but you are constantly trying to rework it and trying to find new pockets of product market fit.
Yeah, awesome. Wow, this is I think your energy is penetrating to us, and I feel like this is a very a good time for anyone to be asking questions about product market fit. So please ask them away in the chat and we will make sure to get to them by the end of the session. But moving on a little bit more about this notion then, as you're trying to upscale your user base and to target those more of the bigger and level of customers, enterprise level customers, how does that shift the way that you build your product features, also acquire feedback or talk to your users, and also run the team? It's a very long question, but first off, with about building your product, how has that changed you by becoming more enterprise oriented?
Yeah, I mean, and this is where coming back to PLG, that it can be a kind of a tricky dance because if you look at something like Salesforce. It has gotten more user friendly over time, but for a long period, and still to this day, largely, it's not the most loved piece of software. I mean, by end users, like it's a little bit clunky in places. It's a little bit hard to enter data. There are whole startups that are built around making it easier to work with Salesforce. Um, but it's really successful because they know who they sell to. They sell to the sales leader or they sell to somebody in central provisioning who has to implement it. And they make it really robust for those purposes. Now, PLG is, and Salesforce is kind of PLG. They're not really, they're very sales led, but like you can go get a version of it online. But really, it's a marketing driven and sales driven organization. With PLG, if your engine of user acquisition is not marketing and sales, but it's the product itself, that product always has to be great. You always have to improve that end user experience to go acquire additional customers. And I kind of love it for that reason because ultimately I'm a product builder. I'm not as strong in sales and marketing. I love building good product. It's what wakes me up in the morning and why I get so excited. Um, but to note it, that makes it tricky when you're scaling it up into that enterprise because now you still have to keep the end user really happy, really satisfied, really excited. Product market fit doesn't stay static. You've got to keep building features for them, but you've also got to layer on for the enterprise, for those buyers, real reasons why they see value in purchase. And it's not always the same as the end user. You know, for I'll continue to use it as an example, but for Figma, you know, shipping that awesome additional palette tool or shipping you know, components that can be architected across multiple areas of your product designs, that might get the end user really, really excited. But if they're selling into the design department at Target Corporation, you know, that's a lot of people that are satisfied. And ultimately, that buyer cares about things like, is it easy to deploy? Um, is it something that's secure? Can we coordinate across teams seamlessly? Does it speed up our development cycles? Does it speed up our overall productivity? And so hopefully, if you're building a PLG product, that end user value is contiguous with that enterprise value, where individual users like it not just because it's great, because it makes them a better employee, and that's valuable to the buyer. But you do have to really think about it's a shift, and that's why I just want to emphasize this. It's a shift in thinking where you can't just layer on cruft. You can't just say, okay, we have SOC 2 compliance. You can't just say, okay, we have SSO. You really have to think about who is your enterprise buyer? What do they need? What do they value? And how can I give it to them? And that sometimes might be a whole new product area that you have to develop.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And also about how that has changed the way you run your team. This is a whole nother topic that we could talk hours about. But if you were to give a bit of a glimpse about currently, how have you run your team so far? And when you're dealing with these enterprise customers and building the software that has to be sturdy and has to respond to a larger set of users, how has that changed the way you operate as a team?
You know, that shift hasn't really fundamentally changed the team organization that much. I mean, you could, it would be appropriate. And I think at some point we probably peel off a product development squad that's dedicated to enterprise development, or you peel off a product squad that's dedicated to a specific area. We're not really at that scale where it makes sense to do that on a dedicated basis. It could. I've seen smaller companies do it. For us, we kind of still cohesively build against the product and what are our priorities collectively. And sometimes those include enterprise priorities, and sometimes they don't. It just depends on what we think is the most important thing to sequence. I will say, like the biggest thing that kind of changes your organizational structure is just the scale of the team. Um, I think it's people have pretty strong opinions about should an organization try to stay flat for a really long period? Is it better to have scale so you have managers? Um, I don't think there's any truly right answer. It just depends on what type of organization you want to run. But inevitably, at some point, regardless of how much desire you have to stay flat or not, you're going to have to add a leadership level, and you're going to have functional experts that run different areas of your company. And so for me, and for anybody who's a founder, and especially for founder CEOs, it's a big shift. All of a sudden, you're going from directly being in prioritization meetings with engineers to having a product manager who's helping with it, to having a product leader who's helping with it, to having an engineering manager who's helping across other engineering managers, to having a sales leader who's actually running against calls. And like each one of these is a learning experience as you expand your team and figure out what works. And at a certain point you wake up and you're like, oh, my job now actually is setting the vision, taking care of the leadership team, and making sure the culture of the organization is correct. And it's funny. Like our jobs as CEO co-founders are so weird because we're probably the only people in the organization that we're asked to continuously do a job that we don't have the credentials for. It's like in the early days, it's like you got to go sell. Yeah, it doesn't matter if you've sold before, you're a great sales leader. Like you got to sell. You're going to be the best person selling it. And it's like you wake up and you have a sales leader. It's like I don't know how to organize a sales team, but like now I get to manage you, and it's strange, but I find it engaging.
That's exciting. And oh wow. Um wait, let me get back to that later on because I do want to end off with your sort of perspective on your founder journey so far. But before that, there are things that we also need to talk about, which is monetization. Because in the video we talk vastly about it, and you mentioned that you waited until 2 years, almost 2 years into business, to turn on that monetization button to users. So in your case, it was actually successful because you were actually able to quickly reach a sizable recurring revenue. But you mentioned that it was one of your learnings that you were free for too long. So can you elaborate a little bit more about this lesson that you gained from monetizing your product?
Yeah, Hannah, I would love to talk about this. Let's talk about this, and then let's also take a beat to come back to chat to answer a few of the questions that are coming in. I want to make
Yeah.
sure that everybody gets coverage. Um, So I mentioned in the video monetization. For those who haven't seen it, we started this company at the very tail end of 2016. We really got off the ground in 2017. And we were building kind of in private beta for a while. It took us a while to figure out the mechanics of the product, get it working, get it to scale. And we didn't release it publicly really until I think this 2018, 2019. Like it took a while. It took a while to get it right. And then it started to rip. Like we were really seeing some scale. And then we pushed on monetization really for the first time in 2020. So like 3 years into the company. And I say that we probably waited too long. Hindsight's 2020. It works for us. But it creates very weird incentives inside the company if you don't have monetization as an element of how you build. And I was lucky to work with great people, so it's nothing pernicious and it's nothing like malicious. But if you're not asking users to pay, you can actually spend a lot of time building product and building features that only accrue value to users who are never going to pay you anyways. Like there's no better filter for users and the ones that really matter and understand your product and ascribe value to it than asking them to pay for it. And those are the users that you need to grow. The other users, I love them to death, and like I hope that they use Clockwise and like they spread it. But if they're ultimately not going to pay us, they really don't matter that much for the business unless they're going to bring another user in. And so any time spent developing features or product for them that doesn't either fuel the product-led growth engine or work on helping to convert that free user to a paid user, it's kind of wasted time. And like time is a very precious commodity, both generally existentially as we believe at Clockwise, but especially for startups. Like you are resource constrained always, all the time. And so you have to use those in the most focused way. So I just think you will have cleaner learnings. You will probably waste fewer cycles if you're incorporating that into the product from the start.
And when you weren't monetizing for those years, what did you think was the more important part other than monetization that led you to that decision? And what do you think you know now that you didn't know back then about the timing for when it's about the idea of having a freemium plan and so on?
Yeah. The So the things that we're prioritizing is fundamentally getting the product to work at like a product and engineering level, like getting it to work inside our organization. It's unfortunately, even though it's in the background, it's automatic. It's a very complex product under the hood. I sometimes look at other applications that are CRUD applications, which isn't pejorative, it's an engineering term. And like you can build an amazing CRUD. I mean, like fundamentally Salesforce is a CRUD application. Huge company, brilliantly successful, and like very complex at this point, but like the basis of what you have to do are relatively straightforward. It's just they grow and they scale and they get more complex with time. Us under the hood, like we're connecting with Google Calendar, we're processing millions of events, and what's fundamentally the most complicating factor is that we're dealing with your schedule. And so like we have to get it right. Like if we have an error or if we're off or we do something wrong or we mess up a time zone or we mess up something, like you'll fire us right away. And so there's an element of getting that right at first. For a long period, it felt like asking people to pay for this thing was premature because we just hadn't gotten it right yet and it wasn't scaling or working. I think in retrospect, like it's a lot of that is fear-based. Like as an engineer and as a product centric founder, my bar is pretty high and it's pretty easy to see all the warts in your own product. But at some point you just got to take a leap of faith and go, hey, if nobody out there is willing to pay for it, it just means we're not there yet, and we'll keep developing it. But like, I think even in the early days, we should have this kind of a lightweight way to do it, but we should have had a like, pay if you want to plan, basically. Like you need some signal of where your power users are, and we should have incorporated that at some level, even if it wasn't that meaningful at the start.
That's a great idea to have that option right there and just to see what happens if you just allow that to happen.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you ultimately want to make sure that it's, you're not funding a company based on philanthropy of your user base. But it's just the point is like thinking creatively about how you can get some of that early signal and baking it into your process.
Awesome. And we have a question from Arnav Garwal on and I think it's a fun one. Wasn't there pressure from your VCs to monetize throughout those 3 years of not monetizing?
Yeah, look, we were lucky in a lot of ways. We're lucky in that we got some really incredible VCs. And I think anybody objectively that would look at our cap table would agree with that. It's not just me being nice. We got really seasoned, high quality investors.
Can
We
you
also
tell
got
us who you're
lucky.
backed by?
Yeah, yeah. So we're backed by Excel Partners, Steve Laughlin, who's amazing. We're backed by Greylock Partners, John Lilly, who's an incredible investor, invested in things like Figma, Instagram, etc. He is now more or less retired from Greylock, but still on our board. We yeah, also backed by Bain Capital Venture Partners and Ajay Agarwal there, who's fantastic. So like a lot of really like and seasoned investors, like people who are rational. And not prone to fear. Like they don't get scared. They don't get scared. Not to say that other investors get scared, but you can see some investors who have less experience getting a little bit whiplashy in the moment. And the other way that we got lucky is that we are in an era where there was a lot of excitement around PLG. There were low interest rates, and so there was this overwhelming focus on growth and scale above all else. I don't think that we could get away without monetizing for 2 years for our VCs at this point. Like if we were to raise money today, just because the environment's changed so much to focus on positive cash flow. You obviously need scale to have a VC scaled business, so growth is always part of the equation. But we grew up in those 3 years in an era where it was growth at all costs. It was just like growth, 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 growth. So did VCs ultimately want to see monetization? Absolutely, but they had faith that if we were delivering enough value and we're scaling it out, we could convince people to pay. And that turned out to be true. So maybe they're smarter than I am, but I think it's a risky bet, and it's a riskier bet these days, and you probably don't get away with it as much.
Awesome. And since we're in the conversation about having a product-led growth, but also there being the bootstrap founders and also venture-backed founders, there was a question earlier from um, Daniel, about when did you decide to raise capital and a little bit more about your sort of different milestones. So for you, when did you decide that you needed to raise capital? Why did you decide being venture backed was the strategy for you, and how has that been working out?
Uh, so for us, it was from day zero, maybe day -3. Like we always knew that we wanted to build a venture-backed business, and part of it might just be part of it might have been a little bit naive. Just it has a certain allure to it. It's like, you see some of the icons of the industry that's their path. But it does come from a genuine place as well, which is that, we were coming out of a startup that got acquired by Salesforce. We had pretty comfortable, good jobs. And if we were going to jump from those jobs, we wanted to do something that could have the potential for really large impact. And with something that has the potential for really large impact, it's possible to bootstrap it, but it's difficult. It is difficult to get the investment that you need in order to scale up the company in a way that allows you to rapidly get to that scale of impact. And so for us, it always looked like a venture-backed business to us because we knew that we needed to have time to develop the product, the idea. We needed to get it to scale. We needed to grow the user base, and that would take a lot of investment up front. So we started, having casual conversations with investors really from day one.
Great, great. And one more question regarding this monetization, and then we can move on to answer some of the questions that have been coming up in the chat. There are many, which is great. So, which is so many of the SaaS product builders battle with this idea of freemium pricing strategies. And in the video, you mentioned that the features that are high growth must be usually free. And I thought that was a very interesting point that was worth elaborating on. So could you tell us a bit more of how you have structured the pricing plans for Clockwise so far, including how you decide which features are free or not, depending on their growth?
Yep. Um, so if you slice and dice this a little bit, you got to start. You can't ever lose the vision. So I think it's easy to start to look at a packaging page, and you can kind of slice and dice things into oblivion. And the product overall has to have a holistic perspective on what it's providing to the world. And so you have to anchor first and foremost in like what is the value that we're providing the world, and what is our vision for this product. And ideally, in an ideal world, the massive drivers of value are behind the paywall, and the massive drivers of user acquisition are not behind the paywall. That's unfortunately not always the case. Like to give an illustrative example that's not a real example, I can't think of one right now, but like, um, actually, I can't think of one. Slack's a good example. The deep value of Slack is becoming the de facto place where people message and converse, and where they have a rich history of information and a lot of integrations and tools that they use. Um, but you're not going to become the deep, consistent record of truth until you have some scale of adoption inside the organization. And the way that you go and acquire other users to adopt them is you chat with them and it's incentivize them and share it. And so like things like Slack Connect absolutely should be free. Like you should be incentivized to connect with more people, bring them onto the product and to start chatting with them. Slack has struggled a little bit in that. I mean, ultimately they've done quite well, but they struggle a little bit in that the core value of that engine of ongoing conversation is it's hard to draw lines somewhere on where to monetize. But the point being is like it's really nice if you have that deep driver of value that's very clear that you can charge for, and you have the drivers of virality and adoption that are free. It's rarely that clean. So you have to look across your feature set and you kind of have to look at it. I've seen it multiple ways to do this. And again, there's probably somebody smarter than me that has a good framework for it, but it always ends up devolving into a gut call. Like you look at the user data, you look at what people are using, like what driving, you inform yourself as much as you can, and then you just make a call. And usually what I'm looking at when we're pricing and packaging is like, um, what is the most important value driver for Clockwise for this feature? And it sounds kind of crass, but it is how I think about it. It's like if the most important driver of value for Clockwise, the business, is that this is something that spreads us out in the world and we're in a growth mode, then I will invest in putting that in the free plan. Like I'm foregoing some revenue because it's a feature that probably some people like and they pay for, but I'm going to put an investment in the business by essentially making that marketing dollars. If there's a feature that is a really core value driver and takes some time for people to adopt, it's like, okay, that maybe that should be usage based. We should have a usage based threshold on the base of that feature in order to make sure that people get a taste of it. And then ultimately we can push them to convert because they're hooked on it. So there's no, it's more art than science ultimately. And people try to tell you it's science, but I think an way to look at it is like, what's the discrete value to the business of this feature and where should it exist in the plans?
Great, that's amazing. All right, well, let's move on to. Oh yeah, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I just noting I am still here. I'm just gonna crack a window because the sun is hitting
Okay.
this room and it's becoming a sauna. But I'm here. I am here.
Got you. All right. Yep, you're looking at Matt's room, everyone.
This happens with like the afternoon light, which is really nice to have, but like
Uh-huh.
it's like just beating on me. All right,
Yeah,
I'm good now.
we don't want to have half of your face disappearing into the
Yeah,
sunset
that's
today.
right. Or just see the sweat drip down my face. That'd be gross too.
Awesome. All right. Well, now let's move on to the audience questions that have been coming in. And I wanted to start off with Mamta's question. So Mamta is asking, thank you for sharing insights on your inspiration to start Clockwise, product innovation and differentiation. What was your he wants to know he wants to know wait, no, this isn't a question. Sorry, I'm sorry. I am a full stack developer and looking forward to be a part of Clockwise. Would you love to hear any suggestions on how I can nail the interview process at Clockwise? What do you think?
I love that one. I'll give more generic advice, which is there's been a real perceptible shift in the job market for software developers. Um, you know, it used to be that we really had to put a lot of, and by used to be, I mean like just 6 months ago, 12 months ago, a lot of effort and energy into recruiting and pulling people in. And we still expend a lot of effort into recruiting and pulling people in, but we get a volume of candidates now. And it's because it is because of that software recession where A lot of people are laying off, not a lot of people are hiring, and so there are just more candidates on the market for each job. And so the advice I would give to Monto, really anyone, is just like to really look at what your unique outside your skill set. Like there's just a bar for the skill set, and like engineering interviews are notorious. Like some of them are BS, some of them are good. It is what it is. I can talk about ours. I think ours is good, but you might think it's bad. But there's a skill set bar. That is what it is. You got to get through that, and I'd be happy to talk about that. But I think what really sets candidates apart is when they think about what's their unique asset. Like why are they great at Clockwise? Like what makes them like, is it that you are somebody who's exceedingly entrepreneurial and you run through walls because you just love building? Is it because you really love calendars and productivity and like you're just so jazzed and energized about this area? And if you can tell that story, and bonus points if you can like LinkedIn troll your way into finding a direct connection to me or my engineering leader or somebody, that really helps you punch through the noise and helps you get the interview in the first place, but also sets you apart from people who might be a peer in terms of skill set.
Awesome. And at Clockwise, then, can you tell us about your first hires, about maybe 10 first hires in the early stages? What kind of talents were you looking for when you were building your team?
Yeah, so the first three hires that we had, we made right away when we got our first seed round check. And they were all people that we worked with formally. Um, and I not everybody has that luxury, but it is great if you can do it. In the early days, there's a lot of value. You don't ultimately want to build a company that's a monoculture. And not just for DI and diversity reasons, which I really believe in, but because more diverse cultures actually yield better products, especially with a productivity product where we're trying to build for the whole world. We want to make sure that we have builders that actually represent different pockets of that world and can reason about it in different ways and add new insights and values to the company. It does make a meaningful difference. But in the early days, you're just looking for people who can move, and you're looking for people you trust, and you're looking for people who will trust you to take a big leap. And often that's people that you know, and it's people that you're comfortable with and have an existing relationship with, and that's what it was for us.
Yeah. And this was a question that we hadn't had in preparation, but since we're talking about your team, uh, how good is Clockwise good at using Clockwise? Like, how do you manage your time within Clockwise, and how do you enhance team productivity yourself?
Yeah, I mean, true to any software company, we really dog food our own product and we're believers in it. So we use Clockwise to nth degree. If you ever schedule with me, you'll get a Clockwise link, not a Calendly link. Because ours are better. And you should use them. You like if you join your one-on-one will probably be it'll be a flexible meeting. We dial into some of the deep features around setting the range of that. And this all comes from some insights that are generalizable outside Clockwise as a tool. Clockwise just makes it easier, which is that um, reducing the amount of fragmented time in the day is really valuable. So if you don't want to go back to back to back to back for hours. You need some breaks in there to be a sane human being. But it's also not a great schedule if you have, a meeting at 11 a.m. and then your next meeting at 1 p.m. and your next meeting at 3 p.m. It's really helpful to condense those. And it's even better if you can condense into like-minded zones of effort. I have the luxury of being the CEO, so I can kind of create my own schedule to some degree. People need time for me, but like I bucket all of my one-on-ones with my leadership team on one day of the week, and then we have our staff meeting later that day. Within that range of the morning, if people want to swap around because their schedules shift, Clockwise allows that. Like it doesn't matter the sequence of it. I just want to meet them on Thursday morning. And then it's really important to have time for deep work. And I think that being proactive about that is really critical. Trying to get deep work reactively just ends up falling apart. And so one of the pieces of advice that I give everyone is take a beat sometime in your week. It could be Friday, it could be Sunday, it could be Monday, but take a beat to think about what you need to accomplish next week and look at your calendar to see if you have the time for it. And be realistic about that. And then block off. I don't love time blocking per task. For me personally, it's just unreasonable that I'm going to sit down at like 11:15 a.m. and want to do this exact thing. But I do believe in blocking off the time that you need in terms of focus time to go after your priorities. And so like I might have like, 15, 20 tasks that I need to accomplish on a Tuesday. But what's important is just that I have blocked off roughly, the number of hours that I need to get through those. So those are kind of the big ones. Be really intentional about time, be respectful of other people's time and how they're bucketing it, and try to coordinate at a good level so that you're using your time effectively and not fragmenting it all over the place.
Awesome. And is your team remote, or how big is it right now?
Remote. We're completely remote. We're about 55 people. We're spread across the US. I used to be I saw that question come in and questions on work from home versus work from office. I used to be like 110% in the work from office camp before the pandemic. I really love the energy of being in an office. I still miss it. And the realization that I've come to over time is that there are big positives and big negatives on both sides. And so it doesn't like it's often people try to reduce it down to like which one's better, which one should I do for my stage of company, or which one works the best. And unfortunately, it's just a question of like, what do you think accrues the most benefit to your organization and to your team? Like what overall works the best? Because do I miss that time with employees, that energy? Absolutely. Do I think that the benefit of being able to hire anybody across the US outweighs that? Absolutely. Do we try our best and I think largely succeed to make sure that we bring people together to get some of that energy? Yeah. Yeah. Like, is it a complete replacement for being in the office every day? No. And so like it's just trade-offs, and you need to think critically about like what do you need as an organization right now and what are the trade-offs you're willing to make. But for us, it came down on the side of remote. It's really been beneficial for us, and I think we work pretty well in it.
Awesome, thank you. Well,
Yeah.
there was a question from Dimitri earlier about pivots, so I wanted to circle back to that a little bit. So he's currently building an online education product for schools that help children from emerging markets such as India, Brazil, to study online in schools in the UK, US, and Canada. And currently, he is seeing a downturn in the online education sector.
Yeah.
So he's sort of considering the pivoting to a new product or so on. So have you had any experiences of pivoting? And if you were to give a tip on how to approach this kind of problem, what do you think you might be able to? Yeah.
Yeah, so Dimitri, I saw this question come in and I love it. I love the space that you're working in. I like this idea. I'll speak just briefly that, even if the double degree is through online education and admission to a US or university, um, you probably know this, but just to state it out loud, people are pretty bad at reading LinkedIn and resumes in detail. And so like even if I've found this before, somebody will go to like I realized that people didn't actually go to that school. They like went to like an online class at that school, but it's still on their resume. And like, at a glance, it gets you in the door. Like it's meaningful. Like it makes a meaningful impact. Um, so I like the idea. But getting to the question about pivots, we we really haven't gone through any super major pivots. Uh the And so I'm not the best to give advice on this. In the early days, we thought that we should build out a calendar. We had a website. We ultimately landed on Chrome extension as a great way to modify and augment current tools. Ultimately, we went back to a web app, but like those are just different iterations on the current product. The fundamental idea never changed. Um, and so I can't give advice on a deep pivot. I think it'd be really hard, and it's hard to do at any sort of scale. So like you have to pivot when you're small. I've seen companies attempt to pivot when they're large, and very few achieve that. And so the best advice that I can give, Dimitri, is not all that insightful, which is just like you've definitely learned something in your current endeavor. You've learned something in building what you have. You've learned about where the real pain points are and where the real value and benefit is, and try to orient and talk to as many of the people in that community you can to expose where your unique angle at driving more of that benefit is and reducing more of the pain.
Awesome. Great. And also a question from Prajwal later on. He says, my product has good traction, but I know that I should get a technical co-founder if I'll be out there selling this. What do you recommend? So I think this kind of circles back to you talking earlier about the different hats that you need to be putting on as a founder all the time. And So what would you say, based on your experience of having to be so many different things while you were a founder?
So first of all, I would have to know a lot more about your business to give good advice. But I'll give you some general guidance here. I think that, you know, every bit of traction you can get before you bring on outside investors or additional employees is ultimately going to be hugely impactful to you personally. And what do I mean by that? If you bring on a technical co-founder right now, you might have to pay them. If you can get away with not paying them, you might have to pay them a lot of equity in order to incentivize that. You're gonna have to give up a lot of the company. If you have to pay them, you might be giving away a fair amount of your profit. Or you might have to go get outside funding, which means that you're going to have to bring in an outside investor, and they're going to dilute you more and take more of the company if you have less traction. Um, Now, that doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do. It just means that you should ground it into the clear trade-offs you're making, which is like the pain of being that solo founder, which is really deep, like really painful. Um, and it is so beneficial to have a partner in crime, and it's so beneficial to have somebody who's technically expedient. But I think that if I were in your shoes at this moment, I would look at like how much traction could I yield over how much time if I just focus on sales for a while. Because, if you think that you can meaningfully move the numbers over, let's say, the next 6 months, that's going to make hiring that technical co-founder way easier. Like they're going to see that. They're going to see that traction is attractive. You're probably going to get better people in. Um, but that all said, if you like have a buddy who's an awesome technical co-founder who you get along really well with, who you believe in, and you can work with them right now, yeah, just do it. But it's just a matter of focus, distraction, and where you can prove out most traction for the business.
Awesome, great. And the question right below from Kanuk is, with so much information available these days, I'm struggling to decide what to focus on and study. Matt, what do you usually pay attention to stay in the loop? And what are you currently studying?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So part of this is forced. Part of what I have to part of what I have to pay attention to is um our ecosystem. Fortunately, I really like productivity software. So when I'm looking for news on the industry, I'm mostly looking at places like Hacker News, Product Hunt, unfortunately X/Twitter, which I find more and more annoying, honestly. Like it just like the ads and like the stuff, but like it's still a good source. I look at like my community and try to attend events to stay in touch and in tune. I also the part that's probably most forced is I really have to stay attuned to where my buyers are and like understand their life and understand what they're doing. And our buyers are end users, but they're also increasingly kind of IT managers, centralized IT people who run productivity suites, and so I want to understand that. Outside of that, I've gone through several cycles, and this goes in a little bit to founder psychology where I felt really guilty about like I'm not doing this, or I'm guilty about like I'm not reading this business book and I really should. And like I've read a lot of business books and like I've spent a lot of time on like staying in tune on things I think I should. And I'm kind of at peace of just focusing my energy outside those areas on things that I really like and I'm interested in. I happen to really like and I'm interested in AI right now. I find it, we're building a lot in it, and I find it really interesting from a technical perspective. So I read papers and watch a lot of YouTube there. But I also find like home automation really interesting and end up getting sucked down that rabbit hole and has nothing to do with Clockwise, and I still like it. So you kind of just gotta balance it. You gotta balance it.
Yeah, and about finding that balance, I think founders are very often stretched out among so many different tasks, and the entire company is looking for you to answer so many different questions and make decisions all the time. So, for you, how have you um maintained your tranquility, should I say, and your pace as how do you balance between your growth as a founder and also your contribution to the company? Sometimes they can come in both, but I think a lot of founders also face difficulty in balancing your personal growth to dedicating to your company.
Yeah, depends on which day of the week you ask me. Sometimes I'm tranquil and sometimes I'm very much not. So, um, it's 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 a it sounds so like hippie, but it's a lot of personal work. It's a lot of like it is a lot of internal reflection on like who are you and what matters to you. Because the dirty secret here is like you can work your ass off and fail and you can cruise and be successful. And so there's just a big element of luck and timing in all this. And as you grow as a founder, you'll probably see you'll get involved in the community, you'll get involved with investor groups, you'll get involved with different people, and you'll see some where you're like, huh, that person is about to have way more money than I could ever imagine, and they are not very good. And you'll see some where you're like, wow, that person is so brilliant, and like they cannot get this product to work. And I think that part of the maturity that comes with this is the realization that like you are your own person and you get to run this journey how you want. And so the energy that you put into it is going to yield the energy you get out of it. Like if you want to come in every day stressed out of your gourd and like anxious about the future and about like what's going to happen around the corner and can you get that funding, like you will live that. You will live that day to day and it will be brutal. And if you come in the morning and you're like, I'm going to focus on what I can control. I'm going to focus on where we need to go as a company. I'm going to focus on the things that I love about this job, working with great people, working on an amazing product. Like, do I wish that Clockwise were, a billion-dollar public company and I was on a yacht somewhere? Sure. But like, I also feel incredibly lucky that like day in, day out, I get paid to make software. Like it's amazing. It's awesome. It's really cool. And I think just grounding yourself in like what you care about, what you believe in, and what you control, um, is a key part of the recipe. And yeah, as Arnav says in the chat, like luck and timing in the market are just, there are a lot of factors that are out of your control.
Awesome, great. And we have some more questions that we're going to quickly address before the time is over. So these are some fun, specific questions that I think we can just answer
Great.
off the bat. So
Yeah.
from Dimitri once more, could you provide suggestions on how to draw in customers through cold emailing and outreach? I'm aware of some products like Clockwise that rely only on outreach and use it like main source.
Yeah, we don't rely that much on outreach at Clockwise, but we do a little bit of it. And the quick answer is that you really have to think through how you add value to the person you're reaching out to. If you're just reaching out as a sales pitch and like I have this cool product and like I can add this value to you, it's probably going to fall on deaf ears. As an early founder, you have the advantage of being really customized and really authentic to that person. And so if Dimitri, you were reaching out to me and say, I have this amazing tool that's going to increase the productivity of your engineering organization by 10x, I'd probably be like, I don't believe you. I'm going to delete that email. If you reach out to me as like, hey, Matt, like, I'm looking for some advice on like how to scale out my eng organization and like, I love, or like, I'm looking for some advice on my product and like, it's about eng productivity. What have you observed? Like, do you have time to give me advice? Like, I'll probably reply to that. So it's just, and that's me. I'm not saying that's generalizable. It's just thinking through your audience, who you're targeting, and how you are going to get them on the hook, and if you can, how you're going to add value.
Awesome. And quick tip, any advice on nailing the messaging on the homepage? So in
Oh
Clockwise
my
right
God.
now, it's your workday, your way. I just searched it
Yeah,
up.
I have no advice here. Like I would give the worst advice. I am like I came to this thinking that I was pretty good with marketing, and like I am so bad with marketing. I don't know. Like test, iterate, test, iterate, test, iterate, test, iterate. Never consider it done. It is never done. You end up changing it all the time. You have an idea that this one's going to be awesome and it's really clever and you're so proud of it. And then you put it up on the homepage and like it tanks conversion. And you're like, well, shit, I guess that was a bad idea. So I guess my only advice is to iterate and be humble. Um, but this is not my forte. I fortunately have been able to hire people.
Awesome, great. Well, thank you for being honest with it. It's fun. I
Yeah,
think it's good. Uh,
it's because I didn't
from
write it.
ah,
That one I didn't
hi,
write.
hire a good marketer. That's there we go. All right, then we have another one. Oh, this is interesting. Have you thought of feature where Clockwise is integrated with sprint planning tools like Jira so that team can achieve their sprint goals by scheduling more deep work? What are some like
Yeah.
new features that you're thinking of? Yeah.
I saw this one come in and yes, we thought a lot about it. In fact, we had an internal project called Capacity Planner that ended up being a sprint planning tool and we killed it. we will get back to it someday, but it's kind of an interesting story on product development. We are a general purpose product, and so there's always this tension between going deep in an area versus going general in an area. It goes back to an earlier discussion that you and I were having, Hannah, about making sure your product has an opinion and knows who its audience is. And that can be really tough with productivity software. And for this specific one, we know that there's something really interesting to be done in capacity planning and with a Jira integration specifically. Um, but we just went way too deep. Like, and we caught ourselves before we put in the time investment and development of it. But like, it became a very niche product focused around 2 week sprints, which most people do. But like, it was a sprint planning tool that was focused specifically on software engineering sprints, and like, we just couldn't see a way that that would pull back into being a meaningful tool for the rest of the audience. And the answer here is that we will probably get back to capacity planning as something that augments outside tools, not as something that we own. Like, we could provide an API to Jira or a Jira integration that pushes out to Jira, understanding of the capacity of the team. And that would be a better use of our time if we could build out a generic API that would allow us to do that across tools than building a really customized interface that, frankly, not that many people in our user base are going to end up to run their sprints off of, because we're not a sprint planning tool. We're a productivity piece of software.
Gotcha, gotcha. All right. And a quick question. What are you most interested in these days, both in terms of your company and your personal life? You mentioned AI before. What's something that's interesting to you in this space, actually?
Um, uh, in the AI space or just generally?
If there's something more interesting, like please have it your way.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I find it really interesting in the AI space generally, and this is a little bit self-serving because we're tackling this, so I'll just acknowledge that I'm biased. But I think we're in this phase. I was not a big believer in um crypto. I don't want to make that a religious point of view or a political point of view or anything of that nature. But I just, like, for me personally, I didn't see, I saw an interesting technology, but I didn't understand the use case. Um, and AI manifests very differently for me, where I see a foundational piece of technology that's only getting better with time. And I think that the issue that we have with AI is different right now, which is that we don't yet know what a great AI experience looks like. Like, we just don't. Like, ChatGPT is interesting, it's good. Um, but I don't think it's I mean, it is mass market by any traditional definition, but like, it's the generic version of something. Like, you look at GitHub Copilot, that's a good one. That's a good one. Like, that's a defined use case that I think we're really starting to nail. But you look at some of the copilots that Microsoft has put out, and like, I don't know. I look at a lot of products that end up just summarizing text, or they end up providing transcripts, or they end up providing translations, and like, I don't think that we've really figured out like how to harness this technology to build a really great experience for users. And I'm just excited about the creativity that unlocks, because a lot of people are trying.
Great. We'll just cover two more questions from this chat, and then we'll have to wrap it up due to the lack of time. Due to lack of time. All right. And then it's why can't the entrepreneur firstly build a solid income source and then go on to build a bootstrap company rather than getting VCs? I mean, that definitely probably is an option. But I guess Muhammad is asking about your opinion on this sort of way of building a company. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I do. So I had the privilege of doing like a small roundtable discussion with Michael Bloomberg, who obviously was very successful in building his own business, and he bootstrapped that business. Yeah, I don't know if everybody knows that, but there's really not that much outside investment. And he's a funny, very pert, very frank guy. Like, he doesn't mince words, and he's like, I don't know why anybody turns to VCs for money. Like, you just give away your company. Like, why would you want to give away any of your company? And I think that's really rational. If you can do that without giving away your company, that's amazing. But there are also, with all due respect to Mr. Bloomberg, very rational reasons why you go to VCs. What he didn't name is that he had cashed out of his prior investment firm and had a lot of personal capital that he could invest in this new business. So he had capital. Sometimes you just need capital to get it off the ground. If you can do that with your own income source and you don't need additional capital and you can get it off the ground with your own, I think that's awesome. Like I think do it. Um, but there's also an opportunity cost to your time. So like you just have to look to the different variables. Like could you go way, way faster with outside investment such that you get there faster? Is that something that you want? Like is that faster scaling valuable to you? Is the product such that you need a massive amount of capital to invest to get it there? Can you bootstrap it on your own? But like all things being equal, if you can do it on your own income, yeah, I mean, like, why would you give your company away? I mean, I think that, Bloomberg's advice there is sound if you can do it.
Clear cut. Awesome. This is one more just came in, but I think this is a very fun question to cover, and it's from server Betty. Matt, do you think that time management tools did not expand as much as other digital tools, such as Uber or new categories, or what do you think?
Yeah, it's productivity is a tricky area, and one of the biggest reasons that productivity is hard is because it's usually soft, what people call soft ROI, return on investment. So if you listed out a few different consumer categories, and those are manifestly different. I am a true pessimist on productivity software in the consumer space. Then the reason is people are terrible at valuing their time. Terrible. Like, and so they won't pay. Like they're just like, I think productivity software in the consumer space is more or less a dead end. I don't know any business that's a consumer-based productivity piece of software that's been successful. And if you think of one in the chat, please send me because like I'd love to see it. I don't think there are any. They all fail. Um, but in the business space, if in the B2B space, they don't expand as for the buyer, it's soft ROI. Like if I sell you a piece of sales software and it helps you sell more deals, that you can often trace that back concretely. If you're a marketing leader and you need to buy a marketing tool in order to spin up experiments on the marketing site, you know exactly what that does. Meanwhile, in the productivity space, I have to pitch you that like our software makes your team faster. And we can do that, it's just harder. And so like it's tricky there. And also productivity tends to be something where people have pretty strong opinions. And so I often like we don't I have a few email clients that I really love. Bear with me here. There is an example. I would probably never invest in an email client because the email client that I love is kind of like an awesome pair of gloves. It's like it's my pair of gloves. It fits me really nice. I love the way it feels. It works exactly right for me. But I'm not going to recommend my pair of gloves to you, Hannah. Like you can try it, but it might not fit you well. And like productivity software has that glove problem a lot where it's like, I love this thing because it's exactly what I need in my work, in like how I think and how I want to work. But it might not be generalizable to everyone.
Awesome. Great. Last question is it's a more general question, but for the EO audience, actually. So we just had about a 90-minute conversation about your product, your founder journey, and how you have been growing. And if you could give any advice to any of the early stage founders and product builders who are watching this session today, would you like to say anything to them?
Sorry, Hannah, you were wrapping up and I got distracted by
Oh, no
Arnav,
problem.
who
Yeah, we
said that
got
they're not a very strong example, but Calendly. That's a good one, Arnav. I would argue that even Calendly is B2B even for the long tail because almost everybody's using it in a business context. So even though it manifests largely as consumer, like I just had a friend, I thought everybody knew about Calendly. And I had a friend who's like, have you heard about this thing, Calendly? And he uses it because he's a real estate agent. So he sends it out there. Like I've gotten them for my plumber, but like it is consumer-y, but they're using it in a business context, and the ROI to them is I get more business. And so like I would argue it's one of the better examples, but I would argue that that is even B2B. Sorry, Hannah, now repeat your
No,
question. I
no
apologize.
problem. No, thank you so much for the detailed answer. Yeah, it was the last question was really just would you if you have any advice to any of the early founders and product builders out there watching this session right now, what would it be?
Yeah, I think you have to be really, really sober about what the end state of your product is in the market. Like if you're initially tackling a problem or issue, I see all the time founders come to me and they get really in love with this vision that they have. And like I love that. Like I get so energized by that. Like I think that's why we all get into it is like we want to change the world. We want to see our vision take place in the world. But the barriers that you're going to have to hop through are product market fit. And like ultimately the market pull is almost stronger than any other force that you have. It's stronger than your willpower, it's stronger than your work ethic, it's stronger than how good the product is. If the market is salivating for a solution, the crappiest product will do. And so I too often see founders who fall in love with the vision or sometimes the technology and don't think really deeply about like, does the market want and need this? And that would be my biggest piece of advice.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, thank you everyone for coming in to this session today. I know that we didn't get to cover all of the questions, but there were just a lot. But thank you, Matt, for being attentive to answer as many of them as possible and for the great talk that you gave us. Just before we end, I just wanted to make sure that this Builders webinar, this happens almost on a weekly basis at the EO Builders Club. So if you're looking to be accessing more of these really great sessions where we feature these amazing founders that have been featured on our channel, then please don't hesitate to find us online. There is a link that is up on the live chat, and we'll also be ending with a QR code that you can scan to enter the session. So make sure to do that. Just leaving you with that note, and thank you so much for coming in, Matt. And we hope to see you again at another event. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been a blast.
Yeah.